In the 1920s, for a period of time, Stefan Zweig was the most widely translated author in the world. He was certainly, with that, one of the best sellers. When we think about Stefan Zweig's career, we have to realize that although many of the Viennese authors from that fin de siècle, early 20th century era, in our own minds today, are elite and forbidding figures, Zweig was an author who communicated to people on all levels of society. He was addicted to travel. There were at least 10 years in which people who saw him felt that they were meeting a film star. He took on a kind of a persona that is not one we think of very often, at least today, with respect to writers. He had an allure about him. Because Zweig had the degree of popularity that he did, and also the charisma that he clearly did, at least at the height of his fame, I was fascinated by the question of how he could vanish so completely. My book is definitely not a conventional biography. I was interested in exploring Zweig's experience of exile as a lens onto the nature of exile beyond him. I speak a great deal about different people in Zweig's circle, and Zweig knew everyone important of his era within certain European circles, particularly within the groups who were concerned with pacifism, preserving humanist values as Europe descended into greater and greater economic and race-based conflict. Using letters and using other primary sources, I try to conjure different scenes that were important in Zweig's development, also some of his youthful discovery of art and his falling in love with literature. But I tried to use those scenes in a kind of conversation with moments of more historical analysis, of trying to think through the implications of key junctures in Zweig's career as a writer and his life as a very tortured exile. My father is from Vienna, and he grew up there for the first 8 years of his life before he emigrated to escape the Nazis. And I'd always been interested in thinking about what the Vienna of my father and of his parents was, and why it seems to hold such an abiding fascination to us, why it lingers in our imagination the way that it does. Part of what Zweig's stories have, even though they very rarely provide many physical details of places in Vienna or elsewhere, they have some sensorial affinity to the fantasy of Vienna. The fantasy that we now have about it is one fantasy, but it was a fantasy when it was happening. And this was a group of people who lived so entirely in their imaginations that I think it was a kind of pathology. It wasn't healthy. It created some beautiful things, but it was such a strained and relentless reliance on worlds of the mind that the physical city, I think, was always something lapping at the edges of people's consciousness, and often lapping in a very dark and deleterious fashion. Through Zweig's story, because he knew so many people and because he was so alive to the possibilities of Europe in a way that was concordant with so many other fantasies of the great Europeans of that era, that by looking harder at him, maybe I could feel something of what my grandparents had felt. And I don't think there's any literary explanation for that. We want to touch the dead who are part of us. We know they're part of us, but we want to touch them. And this exploration gave me at moments a sense that I was at least bringing my finger somewhere close to that frosty, misted over pane of glass.